Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the French Connections Friday edition. Today's date is the 25th day of September 2009. Of course, my name is Daryl Bradford Smith, and it's great to have you with me here today for this most important of broadcasts. We have lots to discuss. Of course, everybody out there already knows that the implosion is well advanced already, and we are in the midst of a period of history that is going to be for the record books, ladies and gentlemen. Even 1,000 years from now, they'll talk about this period in history. There's no doubt. It matches any we've ever faced as humans, probably more so in that it's a global experience this time, not just a regional one. And of course, it'll probably go down in history as the first truly global catastrophe, and it's all taking place as we speak. And many people have asked me over time, when is it going to start? Well, it already has started, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking double-digit plus unemployment in many states in America, even heading into the 20-something% in some areas. Of course, shadow statistics tells us that they understate the unemployment rate by a considerable margin, upwards of 30 to 40% lower than it actually is. And but we're also seeing these problems in Europe. And the governments, of course, of the world are trying to print their way or monetize their way out of these debts. And they're talking on every channel about a virus and flu and vaccination and quarantine and schools closing and all this. And in spite of the fact that there's no hard evidence that any of these things are actually dangerous at this point, of course, none of that means that they can't create something dangerous. We know they have the ability to do that. We know that Ebola virus was formulated in a laboratory in Portendown in Great Britain and in England, in fact. And in fact, it was written about years before the first outbreak. They said that they designed this thing in a laboratory, and then lo and behold, we have outbreaks in Africa. I guess they needed a place to test it. They needed a population to go and decimate with it. But that is a hemorrhagic type of illness, and many of these other illnesses that we're going to be discussing today are also, in many ways, hemorrhagic. And what is a hemorrhagic illness? It is an illness where the body's immune system overreacts to the pathogen and then causes severe swelling, and then of course in many instances the cell walls become so swollen they burst, and you have bleeding, and people can bleed. They can bleed out. They can die from hemorrhage, and that's just one of the many sicknesses that they can foist upon us. One other thing that is important to understand is that they play musical chairs with the description of these diseases. In other words, they can give it a different name, but oftentimes what my researchers have told me and what people have told me is that they actually relabel diseases. And it could be a polio in certain decades, and then the next time you see it, they rename it a different disease, but in fact the symptoms are very similar, if not the same. There's all kinds of shenanigans going on. Much of that goes back to the research done at the Rockefeller Institute, which, of course, ladies and gentlemen, gave me the impetus for my statement that this guy Gates and this other guy Pat Riot were not saying the right story. First of all, to forgive Rockefeller in any sense for the crimes he's committed is absolutely ridiculous. The man's a mass murderer. If he didn't do the research himself, he put the people up to it. So the simple fact is this guy cannot be forgiven in any way. And I've also been getting a lot of feedback about my statement at the top of the website. Now I will read it for everybody, because I believe, I'm being honest, that this is not a game that we're playing here, ladies and gentlemen. This is not for fun we're doing this. This is actually to save our own lives. And I've always tried to be out in front of what we need to do next. And I've always wanted to work through organizations that are actually governmental, because if we end up in pure anarchy, that will only benefit the criminals. So I've written, the world must declare all-out war against Zionism, Zionist Israel, and all who work on behalf of this criminal enterprise. These Zionists and Zionist Jews must be arrested, tried, and when convicted, put to death for treason. Now, I mean treason in every country that they're operating in, and each individual country would need to do their own legal testing of this. But the fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, unless we do these things and we start taking a more prominent role in controlling our own world, but we don't go after the criminals themselves, they will reemerge. They will come back again. They always have. There is a 2,000-year history of these people reemerging and decimating our world over and over and over again. This time, ladies and gentlemen, we need to take a proactive stance on this. We need to go after the criminals. And when I say Zionists, I don't mean just Jews, ladies and gentlemen. Some of the largest communities of criminal Zionists in the world are non-Jews. So we're not talking about a specific religion here. There are Hindu Zionists in India working their criminality. There are animist Zionists in Africa working hand in hand with this crime gang. So we have to understand that Zionism is a political movement, not a religious one. Although there is a predominant and prominent religion at the top of this structure, it encompasses and involves many different religious practices and orders. We see Zionists involved in the top of the Catholic Church, especially since Vatican II. We see Zionists involved in the Protestant Church with people like Hagee and Robertson and others. So let's not, just plant this thing on the doorstep of Jews, because certainly there are righteous Jews in the world. Many of them are starting to fight back. I have a young lady on the front of the website today. Her father was deputy head of the Mossad. And this young lady has absolutely refused to participate in military service and will not go and serve anything to do with destroying or injuring Palestinians. She sees it as immoral and unacceptable to her as a human being. And this is not a rare occurrence within the Jewish community. However, it must be understood that this community has, at least as much or probably more than others, been lied to and duped into believing what they believe. But there are awakenings across the world from this community, and I've always believed the best way to destroy Zionism is from within the inside of Judaism, and having the Jews themselves wake up to the criminals that are leading them into perdition, into this morass, into this real dangerous place that world history is experiencing right now. Today's guest, the person that I want to bring up today, is a returning guest, someone I've known for donkey's years, for all my life. I've known this person, very good researcher, quality writer. She's got a blog named Jennifer Lake's blog, and you can find that on the internet or on the articles that she's posted on my website and her own blog. Her name's Jennifer Lake, of course, and I bring her up right now. Jennifer, are you with me?
I'm here, Daryl. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. It's nice to have you back on the French Connection. You know, a lot of people believe, Jennifer, that this is some sort of, a lot of people treat this as entertainment almost, or as like a hobby. They get home from work and they log into their computer and they want to catch the latest update, but then they leave their computer and kind of go on their way, thinking that once they walk away from the computer, maybe things will just go on as they have. Things are very dire, and people are losing their lives. There's starvation in America already cropping up. You know Providence, Rhode Island well, and I lived there as well, and you know it well. Do you know that under the bridge that crosses from East Providence into Providence, there are families living there now? There are 25 families living under the bridge. I used to get on that freeway entrance all the time onto Route 195, and can you imagine that there are whole families living under these bridges now? But this is just a symptom of the larger illness that America's experiencing, and slated to get much worse. What's your take on all that, Jennifer?
Well, what you're telling me, I didn't know specifically about, but I'm aware that more and more people are losing their homes, that there are tent cities, and in America, this happened in the Depression. So that should make a very clear association to people that we're back to that time in that sense.
I think worse, though. Do you agree? I think it is even shaping up to be worse.
Well, I think what's worse is the fact that we know at this point that we are being globalized in this process, that we understand so much more about economics about distribution, about supply and demand, all of these concepts. We just have, become fairly informed about how things work in the world, and so we know that these are not accidents anymore. These are catastrophic failures, and that these are engineered failures, and we need to deal with that. And this of course is happening in front of our eyes, but we've had a very long-standing kind of stealth going on, and we haven't sorted this out yet. And one of the things that I've been dealing with here is looking at medicine and the medical establishment, and looking at how certain concepts become the foundation of our teaching, whether they're right or wrong. And the problem is that we have a lot of wrong concepts.
Well, let's talk about education, Jennifer. Let's talk about, Nancy Banks and yourself and many, many others have woken up to the fact that there was a family of three brothers involved in research. One went to Rockefeller, one went to politics, and one went to education. Now, that was the very first real nationalization of the process, because they went into teaching universities and began to formulate teaching doctrine that was disseminated across the United States and Canada and the English-speaking world, and that has now become not just sporadic, but the norm. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
The Flexner brothers, of course, I'm speaking about.
Right. They're, besides all these things they actually did, they're very, very symbolic of what's been going on. And that this has been a very unified approach to order the structures of systems so that we are taught in specific ways, that we become very, very regulated. And, I sort of went after Simon Flexner, who was the director of Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research.
Yes.
And what became very central to me was understanding the disease of polio. And Simon Flexner has credit even for having discovered polio virus. Apparently not the original discoverer of this virus. And you need to put that in quotes, because what we're talking about now is whether or not this is scientifically valid. And as it's turning out to be, this is not valid. And I would encourage everybody to look into something called German New Medicine. I've quoted Stefan Lanka, the Dr. Stefan Lanka, for his stance, coming out and talking about virus as not living organisms, that in fact these are essential components to the foundations of biological life. And even as it turns out, that this model is the foundation of all matter. And this is how molecules organize. This is what brings physical reality into being. And so this is really turning this whole paradigm around. What we think of as contagious diseases is largely a legal definition. It's not a medical definition. But this has never changed, because it supports this entire system of how we learn. It has completely given a foundation to the kind of medical practice that's out there in the world.
Well, what you're saying then is that the way they've described it is actually the best way for them to do fear-mongering. In other words, if they describe the science of virus and how it actually, in its innocuous forms, actually is a body function that we all need in every instance, rather than something to be feared and guarded against, the simple fact of the matter is they've used pseudoscience, they've used half-truths to bring us all to the point where we fear anything with the name virus in front of it.
Right. Well, one of the most favorite words they use when they talk about virus is parasites. They call them parasites. when in fact they are just a part of what we are. They are a part of all living matter. And, you know, I mean, this is incredibly insidious. And it certainly has put us in this huge dilemma that we're in, because I see this whole vaccination situation, even if they're telling us that they're not mandatory, what's happening now is that people are being told that they must get vaccines or they'll be losing their jobs.
Yes.
So there's just, you know, a myriad of ways in which the pressure can be put on people, and of course, beyond the propaganda, that there is something pragmatic here. People show up for work, and they say, well, you have to take a vaccine, or you know, you're going to lose your job today.
Well, what specifically in the vaccine, and we know that, I know the list, the mercuries, the squalene, the other adjuvants that are immune system activators, and they don't, and I'm not, when I say activators, I don't mean activators in a positive sense. I mean an activator where you're going to get severe swelling, or like the Ebola virus, you're going to be getting a immune response that causes a severe swelling response, and that of course that translates into what we know as hemorrhagic. And many people have said that there's a whole class of disease that comes out of immune system destruction that causes hemorrhagic type of disease conditions. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. You know, is that it's provoking an overreaction by the immune system.
That's right. Yeah.
Right, and that people are actually dying from having too rigorous a response.
That's right. And isn't aren't all these adjuvants designed to create that swelling effect?
Well, it's actually, you know, like a declaration of war on your body. So, you know, your body just completely, you know, marshals its resources to attack. I mean, this is how it's done. It's being manipulated this way.
Now, doesn't that explain why the youngest were dying the fastest in some instances? Because they were the most vigorous immune systems. In other words, if somebody in their teens to their 30th birthday, they've got the body that is most optimum, and what happens is their immune system reacts the most violently to these things, and of course they swell up like balloons and just bleed out, is what has happened in the past.
Right. It's using your own strength against you.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. This is where your own health will end up being the thing that will take your life. Yeah. And, you know, that's quite strategy, you think about it. You know, having your strength used against you, having your weaknesses exploited, and having your strength used against you. I mean, this is war.
It is war.
It is war, Daryl. And you know what I've been looking at, and the stuff that I've been posting on the blog, it addresses some of those issues. And but it really I want to explore the biology here. I'm looking for good evidence to show that flu is a systemic healing response. It's because you have too much toxicity in your system, and that you develop a flu. It's not just a respiratory illness. What it is that it's a whole body response. And it just happens that your respiratory system is a major elimination organ. You're going to show up with respiratory problems when your body is sick, when you have too much toxicity. So, and given the picture of polymorphisms and how that works, meaning that the combination of biochemicals in your body will develop these organisms to facilitate this healing process, which is why, you know, we have these microorganisms in us in the first place. And through Origin of Life Science, I learned that we are 90% microbes. From the German New Medicine system, I've learned how these microbes actually help us maintain homeostasis. We think of disease as being out of this process, that we've stepped over the line. Well, what brings us back then are these microbes that inhabit all of us. They are our constituents, and that these go to work then, directed by the brain, in order to deal with damage and toxicity in the system. Now, what vaccines do is they completely subvert this direction by the brain. And, the latest thing I posted up on the blog, which was circulating around again, and reminded me of this film called Vaccinations. So I put that back up there so people can go and look at that documentary if they haven't had a chance to do it. But they take up the issue of shaken baby syndrome, which is just this whole set of internal damage that occurs to babies when they have toxicity injected into their bodies, and it subverts their brain's ability to deal with it. They get this incredible systemic damage.
They get an encephalitis, which is brain swelling, which causes convulsions, and they also get a battle-back immune system response that causes severe fever. And this is the response that we've often seen of children, and in many instances it turns into what we know as autism, because what happens is that encephalitic swelling starts short-circuiting the synapses of the brain, and they don't recover.
Well, in shaken baby syndrome, they actually get bruising. They get their organs, their internal organs appear bruised, and their bones appear broken. This is how severe this is to infants. This is really frightening. Now, in adults, or in people that have some amount of immune health, vaccines do give people encephalitis. This is just one of the things that happens. And, of course, this is a notorious aspect of this disease, polio. And, when I look at the science, and put it this way, and I see that polio vaccine is a vaccine that everyone in the world is required to take, and that it's been used as a political tool to force people into medical treatment in many places. And now in 2005, in Nigeria, for example, people were running away from polio vaccination. And
well, what had they discovered that made them so fearful?
Well, at that time, there had been batches of vaccines that were going out that were contaminated. But this happens all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know of any major vaccine that's ever gone out into the world that didn't have batches of contaminated vaccine. I mean, by definition, vaccine is a contamination. So,
that's right. Yeah.
It's almost kind of ridiculous. But at the same time, there were ingredients in the vaccine that should not have been there, that were not part of even what we would think of as acceptable in the whole paradigm of vaccine. So, and this happened. There was a big case in the Philippines in 1993 that came before the Supreme Court there, and they were talking of millions of people that had gotten contaminated vaccine. So,
didn't we see an RBGH? An RBGH was put into a malaria vaccine by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Africa, and they sent samples to India for testing, and it came back that there was a sterilizing virus that was, well, not a sterilizing virus, but a sterilizing pathogen.
Right. There was a type of bovine growth hormone that was in these vaccines. And that's exactly what it did. It caused reproductive sterilization. And millions and millions of women got these.
And didn't this get sent out by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? They put up millions and millions and millions of American his fortune. In fact, he actually earmarked a third of his fortune toward world vaccination programs, didn't he?
Right. Yes, and he works closely with the WHO to get this accomplished.
Now let's talk about the WHO, or the group within the United Nations. Of course, we know the United Nations is one of the major arms of this crime network. But what is it that they're doing specifically now in organizing this latest wave of crime against humanity?
Well, I think that's demonstrated by what's called the Global Emerging Infection System, which is a program that's part of the U.S. Department of Defense. Now, I put some stuff on the blog about that. What they have in mind is what they call one medicine. And this is the merging of human and veterinary medicine. And what they want to do, what they want to be able to do, is to use the same treatment protocols on the population, the entire population, human beings and livestock. And they call this one medicine. And in fact, this is just a new avenue of research that I'm on at the moment. I learned that the veterinary school that was founded at the University of California at Davis had some of the leading ideologues for one medicine. And that even some of the research projects that they do now are pretty eye-opening about what they have in mind. We've been hearing stuff like animals now are being genetically modified to produce pharmaceuticals. Have you heard this?
No. Where are you getting this information from first? Where is it coming from?
Well, it's coming directly from the research that is being done now in the university system. So when I went to look at the UC Davis research, I saw that they have a project at the moment where they're using genetically modified goats to produce an altered form of goat's milk. They're partnering with Brazil at the moment to try this out on children in Brazil who suffer from diarrheal diseases. But what they've done is that they've actually used human genes inserted into these goats. So they're trying to produce a goat's milk that has more properties towards human milk. This is one medicine. This is what they're doing. They're genetically modifying us, and they're genetically modifying the animals to bring us more into the center so that we are more alike and that we can all basically be given the same types of treatment protocols in the future. So I see this whole swine flu thing as a form of testing to see how far genetic material now has been, from animals basically, has been carried into the human population. And when I started looking at the results, the test results that they got from the swine flu breakout that came from Mexico, at the beginning of our pandemic, they gave a statistical base for the people that were tested, and they learned that people over 60 have almost none of these swine avian H1N1 genes. They have almost zero. But people progressively, as they get younger, have a greater and greater percentage of this genetic sequence in their body. And it's not about a contagious flu. What this is the body will produce this virus to deal with its own damage. So when they take these samples, they're measuring the amount of this genetic material that's already in you. You didn't get this from, somebody sneezing on you. This is what your body produced. And people who are under the age of 50, we start going into larger and larger percentages of people that have these genes. And so when you're looking at this population, the highest percentage of the mixed animal genes are now in very young people, teenagers and younger. And then up through the age group, then this slowly declines as you get older. But pretty much everybody under the age of 30, you could say that in this population group, I would say probably a third of the people have these genes. That when they get sick with flu, and everybody does pretty much, whether it's very mild or whether or not it's severe, their body will produce this virus because it's already there. The genetic pattern is already there. So this is a way to create an illusion of a pandemic. And, you know, even...
Because the markers for the disease that these people are experiencing are already present in the body, so when testing is done, they come out positive for the present virus, when in fact they were always positive for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, Jennifer, I have a question for you, kind of anecdotal. Back in 74, 75, when I first went into the U.S. military, they gave me 21 vaccines in shots. And there were people after these shots inside my barracks, and when I was in boot camp, that began convulsing in their beds. Of course, they shipped them out right away, and every one of them, to a man, we didn't see again. Once they went into the convulsive stuff, now all of us in this place got sick. Now, there were different levels of sickness. All of us felt crappy for a few days, but some of the people in this place just absolutely flopped around like fish. And then years later, I started having swelling in my joints, and I didn't know where this came from. And now I'm looking back on it and realizing that I probably was having a latent reaction to one of the things they put in me. No, in fact, listen to this. When I was going overseas and crossing the Atlantic, and they knew I was going for a cruise into Europe and Mediterranean and everything, they gave me a booster shot. A vaccine booster shot, and lo and behold, about a week and a half after it, I'm in the dispensary with swollen joints, blowing out and whimpering with pain from my joints. Now, what kind of damage has happened to me resulting from having all kinds of vaccines shot into me in my military service?
Well, they say that one of the things that vaccine does is it sets you up for autoimmune disorders. You know, inflammation in your joints and swelling. This is getting characterized as autoimmunity problems. It puts slow disease into people, in other words.
That can keep cropping up years and years after the event, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Now we talk about Epstein-Barr, lupus, all this other stuff. These are all swelling diseases. These are all hemorrhagic. And again, the definition in my mind of hemorrhagic is when your cells swell from your immune system reacting to an event or an assault on it, and that swelling is a natural response to it. And of course, when it swells too much, it hemorrhages. But you're talking about a swelling of your cell structure based upon your immune system reacting to outside pathogens or outside agitation.
Swelling is inflammation, Daryl. You know, I mean, this is an effort of your body to try and get rid of, you know, what's being damaged here. But at the bottom of this, these are neurological conditions, and your brain is getting destroyed. Your nervous system is getting destroyed by this process, and you know, that's why I said before that vaccines cause encephalitis.
And meningitis as well, which is one step away. That happens in the spinal column, right?
Right. Well, these are all related. You know, these are related conditions, and that you know, autoimmunity. This is something that I need to explore a whole lot more. But very interesting that in time, eventually, and for the generations being born and yet unborn, you know, they're looking at making genetic changes here in the species, in our species. And I don't know personally, you know, if I can find evidence to answer my questions, but I'm really looking for some kind of research that's gone on to show what the progression of this process is actually going to be. You know, the idea of having pregnant women being the first ones to be lined up to give in shots.
It used to be in the protocols of vaccination that pregnant women were to avoid the shots. Now, I question: is this to thin the herd of humans and to better enslave the remaining people afterwards? Is that what you believe the goal is?
That's what I believe. Yeah. It will do those things. It has multiple uses in that respect, because the vaccines have always shown that a percentage of people die as a result of vaccination. Percentages of people get sick, and they will have lifelong problems after their vaccine. And then, as far as the rest of it, which is forced genetic adaptation, that's what I see as being perhaps a primary goal here, is to see, what can we be turned into?
But what does that benefit for that? Where is the upside for the criminals in doing something like that? And as far as rejigging our genetics for the sheeple, what is the benefit to these people by in doing that? Are they creating better slaves? And if so, how?
Well, yeah, biological control. If you can universalize the species, so that we all respond, in a very homogeneous way to the kinds of treatments that we get, then we can be controlled by vaccines. We can be controlled through environmental inputs, and we'll respond basically all the same way. So this is, making drones out of us, essentially. And I see that this mixing with animals, having our genetics all mixed up in this way, the concept behind the one medicine idea is that we will become then manageable. We will lose the important boundaries that we once had biologically with other species. And so that, there's just a harmonious set of protocols. It will just take care of everything. And we then become a completely manageable population.
Now, let's say a certain group in the world has always stayed away from vaccines. They've never allowed them in their community, and they won't allow them. And maybe for generations have never taken a vaccine. Would these people be given an advantage over the rest of us?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. Are you talking in terms of an advantage of being healthy? Yes.
And how about an advantage of having clear thinking and having capacities and skills that outmeasure our own, because they have been free of the miring of their intellect and the subjugation of their immune systems? Would they then become, in the eyes of the people vaccinated, superior?
I know what you're driving at.
Sounds like to me.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the thing is that that doesn't fit with my view of intelligence. No, it doesn't. It doesn't square. But I can see where you might think that. I don't know. Ask me another question.
Well, okay. Recently, I read some things on your response on a forum, and I'll give the name out. Everyone knows that I work regularly with Ogner over at TIU. You found it necessary, after looking into something, that some comments needed to be made about a guy named Patrick Riot. Now, I agreed with everything you wrote about Patrick Riot, and I actually had made some very strong statements of my own regarding the positions this guy was taking on things. Now, at first blush, much of what he was saying carried some logic to it, but once looked at with a more discerning eye, I was led to a different conclusion. You want to share what some of your conclusions as you looked into some of the things that were written and what you understood?
You mean about this particular individual?
Well, about some of the things, the ideas that were proffered in his take, especially on Rockefeller. I mean, that was one that I went absolutely berserk over. I mean, you can't protect a guy whose money has funded mass murder.
No, you absolutely cannot. You know, it's been part of this paradigm that in capitalism, I guess. And now, you know, I'm out of my depth on this subject. I will tell you that right up front. But what I see happening, and what some people are calling it super capitalism, is that we create an extraordinarily rich elite, and that these people actually have the resources that governments have. They're on a par with government.
Yeah.
And that if you can, it's the illusion that, you know, that these people support capitalism to begin with, because that's how they got rich, of course. But the illusion is that at that level of the game, that they have a vested interest then in keeping capitalism alive.
Well, see, now wait a minute. Now we got to define terms here, because capitalism has never been practiced. You've never experienced in your lifetime or mine capitalism. Capitalism has never been practiced in the Western world, nor has it been practiced in any economy on Earth. What we have instead is oligarchical control of a very select elite group who gives us the illusion that capitalism is being practiced, but never is it practiced. What we have is groups of companies that work together to subjugate the rest of the world's business environment, destroying competition. And capitalism relies on competition. These people have never allowed competition in any industry that they were interested in. There might be some places in the world and some industries in the world that they're not interested in where capitalism does show itself, but anything important to the running of this planet, capitalism has never been involved. It's always been an oligarchical control at the top. And so to say capitalism, you would be misrepresenting what capitalism actually is, which is capital looking for good ideas to help become useful within our daily lives. And that has not taken place. That has not taken. In fact, quite the opposite has happened. But what we're talking about...
At the upper levels, you're right. At the upper levels, it's a fraud. I certainly think that, sort of in the mid-levels there is venture capitalism. There is choice about, people supporting projects and the startup of new companies and things. But it's been functioning under this veil of oppression, through regulatory measures and things like that, there is a very, very limited amount of real startup that could ever occur.
Well, especially if it competes with something they're interested in controlling, yeah.
Yeah, but I see that, since most of us don't know quite how fraudulent things really are at the top, then what we've experienced and what they've called capitalism then is, something, it's just another thing that we're being led around by the nose to think is a genuine form of ideological practice, that they're actually doing this.
That's right.
And so what I see is that anyone who at this point would speak up for the idea that this kind of capitalism actually insulates us from world government, anybody who really knows that it's fraudulent at this upper level, then is deceiving us.
What we call it, Jen, in my circles that we talk about finance and economy, is crony capitalism, and that, of course, is not capitalism, because it isn't free, it isn't market, it isn't venture. What it is directed, controlled, and manipulated, and therefore, by its own definition, cannot be considered capitalism. And so what we end up with is, people like Mr. Whittle, who designed the first jet engine, having his idea stolen from him and given away to General Electric and Rolls-Royce. And you can see that same event and same experience happening with invention after invention. intervention, whether it be something to save electricity or to get us off fossil fuels or to use some sort of technology like Tesla and the rest. All of these things have been manipulated to benefit a criminal elite and never been allowed to freely be shared amongst humans to their benefit. And so what we end up with, of course, is enclaves of very, very, very uber-rich criminals. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But they happen to mostly be Jews, and not the kind of Jew that I've been trying to protect in this fight. Not the workaday guy that goes down to a tailor shop or has a small jewelry business or works for an enterprise. But the people at the top we're talking about multi-billionaires, the Ellisons of the world and the Brofmans of the world, and the guy that runs the Michael Dell of the world, and we can go down the list. But we find 7 out of 10 major billionaires in the world are from the Jewish community, and they're only 1/4 of 1% of the world's population, but there's 7 out of 10 billionaires. That kind of ratio is absolutely off the hook. I mean, it absolutely points to criminality in every sense. And so, I mean, we're facing a breaking point here in what the world can accept for this, and I think we're moving into a new understanding in many people's minds. Whether or not we're going to win this is still up in the air. I'm going to ask you, did you find that my declaration that I read at the beginning of this broadcast to be over the top, or a fair-minded statement of what we need to do?
Well, would you restate what it is that you think we need to do?
Well, let me read it to you once again, because I've had a lot of people be very worried by this statement, and I wrote, "The world must declare all-out war against Zionism, Zionist Israel, and all who work on behalf of this criminal enterprise. These Zionists and Zionist Jews must be arrested, tried, and when convicted, put to death for treason." Now, treason is a death offense in every country in the world. When you act in a treasonous fashion against the public or wherever you live, the penalty is death, and especially at times of war, which we are sadly involved in at the moment. Are you at odds with any of that statement?
Not in its spirit, I am not. I support that in spirit, Daryl. I wonder if we have the kinds of judicial, tools at this point to be able to deal with this. Treason is a national betrayal.
Yep.
So we have to deal with it from nation to nation to nation. Every nation is going to have to take responsibility for the treason that's been committed.
And isn't that the only way we're going to fight back against these people? Because it has to start at the grassroots. We can't do it. We cannot take our world back from the top down. It has to be taken back from the bottom up, and it has to happen grassroots in each community in the world. Everyone has to begin to look around them and their communities and say, well, this is what's happened to us. I can give a good example. The Irish have witnessed a horrendous destruction of their economy, their society, their church, their everything. Now, when the Irish public and the Irish people begin to realize who's done this and how they've done it, they need to begin to organize grassroots and begin as Irish, as individuals proud of their heritage and proud of their cultures and their traditions, to begin to take back their nation for their people, for their culture, for their lives. And it is the richest part of the human family is our individual differences. And the sickest part about what we've described in the past 35 minutes is that difference between culture and people are being erased. And this is the real tragedy that we're all facing, is that what brings us the greatest strength in our lives is our differences are being erased.
Yes, biologically too. So, I mean, to me that's that's the bottom line. Once we dissolve all these biological differences, well, that's utter success for the one world plan. I mean, that's it. We're all done. So, but you know something? We've lost control of our judicial process a long time ago.
Yes.
And You know, what I just see when I look back in history, this is fascinating to me, but a lot of times laws are put in place before they're needed, before there's a crime. And I see that. And recently, you know, over the last decade, we've seen a lot of laws go down in this country about, and this is just an example, about genetic discrimination. So they've already laid down all these laws about it. As far as I think most people are concerned, it hasn't happened yet. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so, you know, they've organized this whole structure already, and it's been sold to people on the idea. I mean, just the propaganda of it is that we're going to need these laws because we're finding out that, and this is not true, I'm telling you, I'm just repeating the propaganda, that there's all kinds of diseases that are genetically based, and we don't want people to be, employers, for example, to be able to discriminate against hiring because someone carries a gene for a certain disease. So they're selling this idea that they're working on it. They're creating these laws to protect us in the future for the discrimination we will face in the future, or might face, given the fact that we have, you know, certain genetic dispositions to certain kinds of conditions. Well, you know, that's a red flag, if ever. I mean, that sort of stuff really scares me because they have planned this and they've been looking at this, and you know, we're beginning to see cases come up.
Well, Jennifer, they're actually passing laws through it. They're going to try and pass laws in the European Union after everybody's under the same complete control, where they have an office of pre-crime, much like Minority Report, where they're going to analyze your activity on the net, your activity in life, your activity in the bank. All of this is going to be merged into a single database, and the computer is going to pop your name, and they're going to arrest you for crimes you may commit.
Yeah, so this should be evidence to us that we lost control of these judicial systems now. Your idea that we could actually have these systems that have already gone corrupt on us be, you know, the only support that we have to actually prosecute criminals with. That just seems, just another bank run.
Well, that may be true in the United States, but there are places in the world, and you know, the system that we had where grand juries can come together and look at evidence and indict based upon what they find is still in place, and it's outside the control in some instances of judges. So basically, yes, we have been compromised at the judicial level, but that's not that difficult to begin to take back in some countries. America, sadly, Jennifer, I haven't told you this in this broadcast, but America watches 8.2 hours of television per day. That's an average. There are more people who watch more television than 8.2 hours a day. Now, the next closest country in the world only watches half that amount. So if you want to know how bad America is, they are completely boneheaded. It is a bonehead nation full of boneheads. And I got to tell you, the numbers on the television watching just tell you all you need to know about how far gone the public is.
Well, Daryl, you know, you can't be sure how much of what you're getting is just pure propaganda.
I got to tell you, it makes sense to me that they're not reporting all of the people who've been unemployed over the last 2 years, and there are a lot of people sitting on couches with their eyeballs on a television set, and I'm telling you that a lot of them are just sitting there with a dumbstruck look on their faces, trying to figure out what they're going to do next until they get kicked off their couch and sitting on some curb somewhere.
Well, but haven't you also read somewhere, you know, haven't you also seen support for statistics that say that more people are going to alternate news sources, they're using their computers, they're using local and regional research?
That is happening, and it is only happening in a minority sense, and I got to say, the numbers of alternative visits to the truth are not necessarily a good indicator of how many people are learning the truth, because basically I see a lot of sites that are spinning lies growing enormously, and a good example would be Alex Jones or Mike Rivero, where he puts out a good bit of truth and then the rest of it's nonsense in both instances, or Jeff Rentz, where you can get vacations to the moon or Sasquatch pictures or whatever. And these people, yes, these people's sites are growing. But the fact is, when I go to sites that are putting out quality news and quality information, they're not growing in the same exponential way. So it depends on what kind of news you think they're getting. I mean, you might be going from a boob tube to a boob blog.
Yeah, I think there are issues that make everything just go into quantum leap mode, and of course, what happened on September 11th, perfect example. Suddenly masses of people got onto their computers looking for news and information.
What good is that if they get the wrong information once they look?
Well, you're just going to have to
have faith.
Have some faith. Yeah, have some faith that people will begin a path. Nobody gets it overnight. Nobody does. Not one of us. It took a lot of investment, a lot of reading, a lot of learning, a lot of watching, a lot of sorting for all of us to get to the point where we thought that we knew enough to be discriminating, to be able to be discerning about the kind of information that we're getting. And that's just unavoidable. That's all just the path of learning. Now, if something like vaccines would be the next event, if that would just push masses of people into finding out what their rights are, finding out what medicine has been doing all these years and decades, then we're going to have another algorithmic growth period of people out there looking for information. And, the bad information will fall by the wayside eventually. I've been to the sites that you speak of, and, all it's going to look to a number cruncher is I'm just one more digit on the counter. But the thing is, I've gone there to do some of that sorting, to see what's out there, to get a taste of that propaganda, so that I can then inform my own search when I go looking for the truth. So this is more spin of the numbers. This is, this is highly illusory, this whole thing. This is psych war more than it's anything else. And, it's just like this whole pandemic. This is being propagated in the news. This is using, these faulty concepts we have about disease. This is taking advantage of a very long-standing legal definition of something called contagion, rather than perhaps the real medical truth of contagion. And even there, you've got just layers and layers of false information to plumb. So there isn't anybody, who isn't taking on a Goliath in this process. But there is something greater. We've talked about this before. There is something that speaks to your heart in this process. If you can be lied to this much, obviously, it's time to not just wake up, but to keep on waking up and keep on waking up and get up every day and just, look at all this stuff that feels so surreal and say, get me my facts, please. I need to know exactly what's going on and what happened. And so hopefully, that the people who are doing that are that sociological 1 in 10. 1 in 10 has a great influence. So one person informs 9 others who then, become associated in some way with the influence of that one individual. So, if you want to shoot for numbers, you're looking at 10% of the population. If 10% of the population smartened up and they just knew what was going on here for real, then you would see the victory that you expect and hope for.
Well, one of the things that's happening, and this is happening, there are places like in Hungary where they're fighting back, where there's places in Europe, Ireland's trying to fight back with their vote coming up on the Constitution for the EU. We're doing it. You're doing it. People are doing it. We're still a minority, and we're still fighting against the larger voices of deception out there. However, the inroads we make are limited in some instances because people are fearful. They are very fearful, and of course, as we spin out this new viral nightmare that they keep wanting us to believe is going to unfold, and may in fact unfold at their urgings and participation, and we may end up getting sick from vaccines, and I believe that's a real serious possibility. What we need to do is come together as people and start really taking stands. Now, do you see that we're actually winning this war of information, or do you see it's a pitched battle? Or where do you see we are in this fight?
Well, it's a pitched battle, no question about that. I don't know. I really don't know. I think that remains to be seen. I think that the vaccine issue is going to be a big thing in this process. I think how publics respond to the idea that they should go line up and get a vaccine on the basis of a pandemic that isn't is going to be a huge determining factor. So I see that feeling that you're after is probably going to be something you'll have a handle on very soon. I mean, we're only weeks away from having this, having them make their really last big ploy over this whole incident. We'll see. We don't have long to wait. So, for that reason, most of my blog is just devoted to the whole story of the flu. Looking into the history, looking into medicine, looking into vaccines. I don't even really want to shift off topic right now because I feel the immediacy of this problem. And I think it is that important. I think that if we can really stand up and, find a loud enough voice, so that our governments hear us and our governments respond appropriately to what they hear. We probably more in my mind than anything else, we've been deceived scientifically.
Yeah.
We've had this whole medical paradigm develop.
Well, science is a religion in my view, and I think in yours as well, isn't it?
Yes. And there's been an extremely concerted and unified effort to have medicine be an extension of the entire scientific paradigm. One that sets out to conquer nature, to manipulate nature. It couldn't be any more clear to me in the evidence of this non-pandemic that this is the goal. That one medicine, this concept, this is the goal. This is the way to reduce and control the population. And, if we don't get this, then we're just not going to get it.
Yeah. Well, Jennifer, we've reached over our hour. I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what you're going to be writing soon and what information you've got coming up. There is a post I put up on my website called "The War Upon You" that you wrote already. But what articles do you have in the pipeline, and what kind of subjects are you starting to research at the moment?
Well, I'm going to talk more about this one medicine now and post that up because that is what the CDC, our military, the World Health Organization, they are all behind this. This is what they are doing. And that's what underlies this pandemic. So, for what's coming up in the very near future, I'm just going to be addressing that issue and looking more into that. And then, things that I learn incidentally along the way, more news about adverse reactions to vaccines, how deadly they are. If I could say anything, to get the word out there is don't take vaccines, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, the other thing that we've talked about, there are agents and foodstuffs that can be taken to reduce swelling. One of them that has gotten a lot of airplay on the French Connection, and I think you'll agree, the one that curcumin, and people who take large amounts of curcumin in their diet don't get these immune responses of swelling and hemorrhaging that happens in many of us. And there are other things that can be taken to ameliorate the swelling part of the immune system overreaction. Do you have a couple of suggestions on the way out besides curcumin?
Well, things that I've stood by all along, which is, just taking the simple measures of lemon juice, lemon-lime juice, vitamin C. Just look to your protein intake. Make sure that you have, enough protein in your diet. And I recommend raw eggs to people as a way to boost daily protein. Fresh foods, that sort of thing. If you have inflammation, and you will get that if you get a vaccine, then you're going to be depleting your body's store of protein to fight that infection. So, but more than anything, do not take these vaccines.
Yeah. Don't tax yourself with that kind of threat.
Right, because we've been taxed for too long. We've been led to this path where we will have these kind of responses. People who are well-fed and malnourished. I mean, that's a huge aspect of what's going on. We've been getting these processed foods. And don't overreact. Don't be afraid of the flu. The flu is your body's way of telling you that it's struggling to be well. And this swine flu, this is not a threat. This is not as serious as seasonal flu. We've been lied to in a very big way about how these genes have been dispersed into the population.
You're saying the threat comes from the shot itself, not from the swine flu?
Yes. It's going to be normal for about a third of our population to turn up with these H1N1 flu genes. That's normal. It's part of us now, So when you get the flu, you're gonna produce some kind of virus that will, be testable. And if it comes up with this swine flu, well, we've had decades of having these genes spread around into the population. And the younger you are, the more likely you are to have this genetic sequence come through as a virus. So this is part of the illusion, and not to be afraid.
Well, Dr. Henry Nyman's been pushing the vaccine as a solution to this, and he's a dangerous guy. He's front and center on Jeff Rentz's programming, and he needs to be marginalized in major ways. I have come out against certain people that are deceiving the public, Jennifer, about a lot of stuff, and they are people that many patriots and many people wanting change trust. And the reason, and I've caught a lot of flack for saying that these people are putting out the wrong story. I know they're doing it. I'm watching them do it, and I'm reporting on it, and yet their website's numbers are growing, and I couldn't be more upset about the fact that people are not really catching on to the deceptions I see.
Well, we have to soldier on, Daryl. That's, we do the best we can, huh? And just go for the research. Just keep telling the truth as you know it to be, and that's the best you can do.
Well, that brings us to about an hour and 10 minutes, Jennifer. We've done a great job of moving around a lot of subjects. When people want more detail on the work you do and the opinions you've presented and the ideas you're proffering for their perusal and their understanding, it all comes out of our general discussion here, because there are many subjects you've written on and there are many things you've talked about, and much of that can be found on your blog, Jennifer Lake's blog.
Vaccinations.wordpress.com.
Okay. And you'll also find many of Jennifer's articles in the center column on the French Connections website, as well as on the right column in the news section. This was meant to be a general discussion so that people can get an idea of some of the beliefs and understandings you have, so that if they trust your veracity in these areas, they can go on and do further reading of the work you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I hope they will. And to the best of my ability, I've linked everything to the research so that they can, check me.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the conclusion of this installment of the French Connection. I want to thank Jennifer. Jennifer, thank you.
Thanks, Daryl. Appreciate it.
And you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending the time with us on this most important subject, of many subjects, in fact. And I want to urge you all to continue on with your protection of your families, because remember this: the building block of any society starts with the family. And again, I said this is a bottom-up fight that we have. And if you're strong in your first construction, which is your family, you can go on to your neighborhood, into your community, and then into your state, and then into your country. And it has to happen in that direction. So strengthen your family. Have faith that we will persevere through this battle, and take care of those you love. Be mindful that much of this fear-mongering is only that. Fear-mongering. Don't fall victim to the hype and to the nonsense. Stay strong until the next time. This is Daryl Bradford Smith telling you all, please be well. Bye-bye now.